Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today, we're joined by head strength and conditioning coach of the Edmonton Oilers, Chad Drummond. He started as an assistant strength and conditioning coach with the organization in 2010 through 2012. Fantastic conversation that we had with Chad today. We discuss his transition from an assistant strength and conditioning coach to the Edmonton Oilers to now the head strength and conditioning coach, what his job encompasses on a daily basis, the return to play process, measuring what matters, and communicating data to key decision makers. It's a fantastic conversation. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Chad. Thanks so much for joining us.
How's it going, Anthony? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I heard a lot about you, and it's a privilege to put a face to the name. Obviously, a colleague of yours, Joel Jackson, Double J, I call him. We had the opportunity to chat a little bit early in the third episode of our podcast on on-ice testing, and at that time, you mentioned that you'd definitely be a person that to talk with. So really, thank you for joining us. Looking forward to learning from you throughout the course of this hour. Could you start by giving us a little bit, I don't like to ask that background part, but you're obviously the current head strength and conditioning coach with the Edmonton Oilers. What are your job responsibilities in terms of daily? What do you oversee on a daily basis?
Yeah, I work quite a few hats. Obviously, we
Okay.
oversee the strength and conditioning for both the Edmonton Oilers and then Bakersfield Condors.
Okay.
I oversee all our nutrition, and then that would include supplementation as well. I oversee our return to conditioning, so I'm part of the rehab process. I would also be part of kind of our player development department. Again, more on the strength and conditioning side, but I would have my hands in player development as well. And then I oversee a lot of our technology with the club. I oversee a lot of the testing with the club. And then ultimately, I kind of take care of all of the data science that we're collecting that would run through me. So yeah, I wear a few different hats with the organization.
I'd say so. That's fantastic, which kind of leads me right into the next question. Before you took over the head strength and conditioning duties, you were also an assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Oilers, 2010 through 2012. How do you feel that job prepared you for your current position with Edmonton?
Yeah, that job it's quite a bit different than what that position is now. So when I did it, the head strength coach at the time, his name was Simon Bennett.
Okay.
And it was more of a part-time role. Like I was never full-time. I didn't have my hands in all these other areas. I had no involvement with data science. I had no involvement with player development. I had no involvement with nutrition. It was just solely strength and conditioning. So whenever Simon needed help, I would come in and I would assist him, and then I would be gone. So I didn't have a lot of the pulse of what was going on with the team, what was going on with the organization.
Okay.
It was just a strength and conditioning role. And I think it was a great way to start out. I think I got to hone my skills as a coach. I got to hone my skills as a program developer. That was something that Simon was great at, was making me part of that process. I mentioned I didn't have a lot to do with data science, but I had to do with what we were collecting in the gym.
Sure.
I had a lot to do with, how we were testing and, helping Simon with collecting that testing information. But I wasn't, again, helping on the supplement side. I wasn't helping with the nutrition. I wasn't helping Simon with collecting any on ice measures. So when I transitioned into that full-time role, there was a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
Simon kind of moved away and I moved into that position full time. And it was like, hey, you need to be responsible for this. You need to be responsible for that. You got to help out in this area. So there was definitely a little bit of a learning curve. But yeah, in terms of just being a coach, it was great. Like I learned how to communicate with players. I learned how to, manage programming within an 82 game schedule. And yeah, I learned how to build those programs for in season. So it definitely helped me in that area. But again, I got hired on and there was a bit of a learning curve. All of a sudden, all this stuff got kind of thrown on my lap.
Very interesting, which kind of leads me right where you're at right now, which, you're now, I say, mentoring, perhaps also, getting Joel. He's an assistant strength coach that falls under your department. What are the expectations right now under your current model with the Edmonton Oilers for the assistant strength and conditioning coach? Are you putting more and more responsibility in each of those areas that, when you first got into Edmonton as a strength coach, you weren't seeing as much? And how does that work in terms and measures of the team that you've put together, both you and Joel, assistant strength coach, head strength coach?
Yeah. So when you mentioned mentorship, like Joel's actually the same age as me, and he has a ton of experience in the industry. And that was the nice thing about hiring him on. It's not like I was hiring a young 20-some-year-old just getting out of, graduate
Yeah.
school, finishing their undergrad. Like Joel came with a wealth of knowledge
That's double J, baby. That's double J.
that's your double J. So no, Joel was an excellent hire for me. Where Joel probably lacked or didn't have as much experience is in all those other areas I was talking about. He
Yep.
had hands in long-term development at the university, but the way things were structured there is, he oversaw, I think it was 150 to 200 athletes. And
Golly.
yeah, and he was overseeing like 5 to 6 sports. So he kind of like me, like he in that time, gained his voice in the gym. And I think he learned how to coach different athletes and different genders, and had a lot of experience putting programs together. But he was never in hockey, was one of the teams. He oversaw men's and women's hockey. It was part of that group that he oversaw. And, with that group, it's not like he was with them every day. It's not like he was helping them with their nutrition or ordering food or ordering supplements or, load monitoring. They did some off ice measures. They did some jump measures and some sprint measures. And, he would do on ice testing and that with them periodically. So him coming into this role, I think maybe where that mentorship kind of comes into play is getting him up to speed on how to handle a team and how to handle all those different areas. I think a lot of that was new for him.
Sure.
And the way I like to run things is, I want Joel a part of all the decisions that are made. We have kind of a team approach in the way we do things. It's not like I'm the strength coach and this is my way and this is what you have to do. And yes, he has responsibilities, but ultimately, I want him involved with everything we do. I want him involved with the data science. I want him involved with the nutrition. And then obviously he's a big part of our strength and conditioning program.
I think that's outstanding in any kind of model, regardless of what quote unquote position, whether it's assistant, head. This idea of everyone's idea, it also, defending your ideas, and I don't mean that in an argumentative way, but you explain. Perhaps there's a better way of doing something, and it's not always by hierarchical. It's by the best decision. I think that's an important in any working team environment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the nice thing about, hiring Joel and the age that he's at and experience he has, he comes with a voice, he comes with an opinion. And
Absolutely.
that was important. I don't want somebody in that role that's just a yes man. I want somebody that will challenge me and bring forth new ideas.
Yeah, great points. Great points, Chad. Let me ask you this in terms and measures of the objective measures of a strength coach. I think this is sometimes hard to define depending on A, the team, or B, the league, or C, the position. And I think they're all difficult to define. My question for you is, what are the objective measures? Are there objective measures from management in terms and measures of what you're graded on, for lack of a better word? And do you set, on a piggyback question, do you set objective measures for your team as well? I'll give you an example. Again, just throwing
Sure.
things out there. This might be, we're ranked on man games lost to injury. We're ranked on content knowledge, as subjective as that may be. We're ranked on, hey, do the guys like being around us? Are there objective measures in any of those capacities from management and or internally in the staff?
No, we definitely have meetings at the end of the year, but
Okay.
it's not like I have targets. We are, rewarded in terms of if the team is successful or not. So we are built into that, into the success of the team. So we're definitely measured that way. But I think everything you brought up, like we sit down with management, we sit down with coaches and that at the end of the year. And, those are things that they bring up. Like they do exit interviews with the players and they ask the players questions like, what do you think of Chad? Is Chad a good coach? So that the players have a bit of a voice in that
Sure.
area too. And
Sure.
then, yeah, in terms of the GM and that, like, again, not overly objective, but there are definitely measures like, how is the team performing? Where are our injuries at? Do we look fatigued? Could we have done more in that area? Do our players performing well? Do they look strong on the ice? Do they look fit on the ice? Do they look fast on the ice? So I've never really had true objective measures thrown at me from management, but yeah, I'm sure they have kind of their list of things. And, for me as a manager, with Joel, I don't necessarily have objective measures either, because I think those are challenging.
Sure.
I think me and Joel, we do share an office, so we communicate all the time. So if I have ever any issues or anything that needs to be addressed, I think that just happens. I pick my moments throughout the course of the year, and then at the end of the season in the summer, I'll do an exit with Joel. But that's more around like reviewing the year and like looking at data. What could we have done better? How could we have improved as a group? And then I like to throw a lot on him too, is, how can I empower you? How do you want to get better? Where do you want more of a voice? How can I make you happier or more involved in this current role? So that's something as a manager that I'll go through with my staff. And that, that's the same for our Brian Gans, our strength coach down in the minors as well.
That's fantastic. I want to pivot ever so slightly. Now you talk about data analyzation. You and I kind of spoke off the air, and when I did speak with Joel, he had mentioned. He said, "Anth, you need to get Chad on the podcast. He's masterful at the return to play and using objective measures." And I want to get into that kind of realm right now, which is return to play, return to conditioning. I want to ask a basic question, and it's rudimentary in nature, but I think I think it's an important question. Number one, in terms of documentation, I just want to start with injury, right? And when I say what constitutes an injury, it sounds like really thanks tips. I mean, you missed a game, that's an injury. Having said that, there are time loss injuries, medical interventions. There's all complaints injuries. Someone complains, they get it docked. How does the team measure injury? Is it a strict man games lost? Is that what you tally over the years, or is it an all complaints definition? How do you keep consistent with what defines an injury, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference between being hurt and being injured.
Yes.
Um, But you know what? So we have a great medical staff.
Okay.
We have a medical director, we have a head athletic therapist, we have assisted athletic therapists, we have PTs, we have chiros, we have massage. We have a really strong group, and they would manage kind of that area you're talking about, like tracking those injuries. And everything essentially gets reported. So if you're hurt, it still gets important. It still gets reported. So it's important for the group to know. And I'll give you a bit of an example. So let's say somebody sprains their thumb out on the ice. If we're in the gym planning on doing a pushing day, we might aggravate that injury. So it's important that we know what's going on. So ultimately would fall on the head AT or the medical director to inform us. But they would let us know, hey, this guy's dealing with this particular issue. And then that goes with the equipment guys as well. So if there's a bit of a thumb issue, they might have to build a little bit of padding into their glove to help support that a little bit. And then it's also important that the coaches know. So let's say there's a little bit more of a technical day happening on the ice, and one of our forward coaches, let's say this guy's a center, wants to work on face-offs, that might not be a good idea for that particular ailment, right? So it's important that things are being tracked, and it's important that things are being communicated. And for us as a group, we meet every single morning, and we go through all the guys, and we go through these little issues to bigger issues. And then in terms of when you're injured, yeah, usually rule of thumb, if you're missing games, that would constitute as an injury, because now you're seeing man games lost.
Sure.
And proper documentation is extremely important there, because it helps you also with the review process. So once the season ends, you're able, or even throughout the course of the season, you're able to look back at, injury trends, and then start comparing that against some of the data that you're collecting. So we collect a lot of on ice measures. Could we have done something different from a practice perspective? or game minutes, we adjusted those to be able to prevent something. And then also with our in-gym stuff, like are we going about it the right way? Are we giving them enough of, say, a certain stimulant that would assist with maybe, injury mitigation? So, yeah, proper documentation is extremely important. And there's definitely a difference between being injured and being hurt. But yeah, we would definitely constitute, an injury as man games lost.
It's interesting. I actually did a little bit of this in my PhD, looking at articles in terms and measures of what is injury in ice hockey, and it seems basic, right? I mean, you look at different sports like soccer and rugby, and there's essentially a consistent definition of what constitutes an injury, whether it's a
Sure.
game's missed, whether it's seen by the medical staff. And what this allows you to do is not only see your team and the trends that you see in your team, but you can compare it against the league, or in this case, not that you would care to do this, but perhaps another league altogether, whether you're seeing longitudinal data, which, it's interesting. I believe, and I don't want to speak out of context, when I wrote that article, I don't think there was a universal definition of what constituted an injury in professional ice hockey, specifically the National Hockey League, which I thought was interesting nonetheless. Talk to me about this difference. We hear about it a lot, right? The difference between, return to train and return to play. That I'm sure is monitored, but talk to me through the steps in terms of, let's just take a hypothetical example. Someone comes down with a lower body injury. It doesn't, whatever it needs to be, and we're tracking that injury. Who are the touch points in between that time? And then are there objective measures that you're using to say, okay, player X is ready for the ice based on XYZ? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So if we have a lower body injury, for example, acutely, a lot of that is managed through the medical staff.
Okay.
So start kind of that process. They'll start working with them. With that terminology around return to play versus return to train. Return to train happens really quick. And again, kind of injury dependent. If there's surgeries involved, if there's scar healing, all that kind of stuff, that will change it. But if you have a lower body injury that's going to keep somebody out, let's say 3 to 6 weeks, and it's non-surgical, we're training right away. And that
Yes.
happens within days. And we want to avoid any kind of detraining. But again, a lot of the acute rehab stuff at that stage, early stages, would happen more on the medical side. So they would be working with the therapists, the chiros, the PTs. They would take kind of a group effort to decide how to approach that particular injury. And then on our end, we're focusing on, maintaining strength, maintaining power, maintaining fitness, maintaining mobility. And then as the process goes on, the therapist will start relying on us for, say, a little bit more intensive re-strengthening, or some more intensive movement patterns, or introducing some speed patterns. And that might happen in the pool, that might happen dry land, just kind of depends a little bit on the injury. And then the other massive piece within that return to play model would be our coaches.
Oh,
And something that we do is we manage their schedule. So once the therapist feels that player is ready to skate, and from a performance staff, we're pushing them. We want that athlete back on the ice as quickly as possible. We don't want them missing much time. And then we take it upon ourselves to make sure we're building the appropriate schedule. So one tool we use is Catapult. And the one thing Catapult has done for us is allowed us to get a better understanding of the game. So we know what a normal week looks like for all the players on our team. So what we start doing is now building a schedule where we reverse engineer that. So we start slowly introducing them to different things. So we're slowly introducing them to, maybe a little bit of volume. We're slowly introducing them to a little bit of acceleration. We're slowly introducing, a little bit of change direction work. And that's kind of a group effort between us and the medical staff on what they can handle. And then once we can get them with a coach, we do that as quick as possible. And we try and employ the coach that would help them best. So if they had like an MCL, or let's say a high ankle or something along those lines, we might actually use one of our skate coaches a little bit more than, say, a positional coach, because now there's some local strengthening that needs to happen. And ideally, we're doing that in their environment, in the world, and that would be on ice. And then from there, we're also implementing the tactical side. So if it's a D coach, maybe they're working with one of our defensive coaches. If it's a forward, it's one of our forward coaches. And by putting together that schedule, it allows us to be able to properly progress their volume. So within that schedule, we actually put stuff like sets on there. So our coaches know how many sets of particular drills that they can do. And then our goal is to get them as close to where they were pre-injury as possible. And it's challenging with, especially some of the lower body injuries, because there's some acute healing that has to happen. And, you could go weeks without skating, and then you got maybe a week and a half to get that player ready and expose them to all those different demands that they're going to see once they start playing.
Yeah, I love this idea. A couple things that stood out to me with your response. Landmark versus timeline. I think it's important specifically in high performance sport. You're making a living playing a game. This game is hockey. You're dealing with outliers. You're not dealing with averages, right? Like you're
Yeah,
dealing with
yeah.
elite athletes. So, a timeline that you might look at in research for an ACL or an MCL might be very, very different than an Olympic sprinter or a professional hockey player in terms and measures of their bodies, how they take care of their bodies, and the lifestyles they lead. So I like this idea. I don't think there is an exact answer. Everybody's different, but certainly getting them moving as fast as possible because all systems are interdependent on one another, and the detraining effect certainly takes place. And I like this idea as well, specifically with a catapult, is starting from the scoreboard and working backwards. And this is workload, right? Trying to be able to create a baseline when that player was healthy. I would imagine you do that either from exhibition games and practice. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the league doesn't allow us to collect in-game data.
Yep.
We're now able to get some GPS data from the game, and that's collected through the league, but we're not allowed to wear our monitors in game. But the one nice thing we are is we're able to wear it at the minor league level.
Oh,
So they can
that's
games,
great.
they can wear it in practices. So we know what a game looks like.
Sure.
And then we have developed our own algorithm that allows us to get information based off of games. So we do get a cumulative load, which is important for us. So we do see the bigger picture of what's going on. But yeah, our league doesn't allow us to wear those units in game.
Let me ask you a question. I asked a off the cuff question. I asked another colleague in the National Hockey League this question. Works with GPS for quite a bit. My question is this: if I took your GPS unit away from you right now and everything, you're not measuring at anymore, and you've had the experience that you've had with the system, in this case, Catapult. Could you create heuristics, rules of thumb that would lead you to, I don't want to say exact same results because n equals one, but could you create those rules of thumb based on game, practice, schedule, return to play in terms and measures of workload? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And the answer would be yes. Like
Okay.
I've worked with Catapult for 6 years now. And again, I have a really good grasp of what a practice is, what games are, and then how to progress those appropriately. So yeah, I could live without, I don't necessarily need it, but I think without having those tools, I wouldn't be able to get where I'm at now, if that makes.
Absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. I guess, for someone perhaps that either can't afford it or doesn't have it, to look at existing research and game loads, workloads, and be able to scale that back from a heuristic. I guess, again, everyone's different, but be able to use that as a rule of thumb, I think certainly helps, and to make better decisions if that
For
makes
sure.
sense.
And with that too, Anthony, I understand what the game looks like and what to expose them to, but
Yes.
also provides us with some checks and balances. So by wearing Catapult, we're able to see asymmetries. And then by wearing Catapult or by using stuff like GPS, you can get force or you could get velocity, which is important when you're trying to figure out where that athlete is at, because then you know what they are healthy, you know what kind of forces they produce, you know what kind of speeds that they either accelerate or decelerate at. So then you have this good picture of what they were pre. So yes, rebuilding volume is important, but also all those underlying issues, like are they as symmetrical as they were before? And can they produce as much force as they were before? So that also comes into play in terms of us making the decision of if they're ready to return to sport.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a 2-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com.
Yes, makes sense. Very well stated. Gatekeepers in that process, you talked about medical staff. You talked about, obviously, the strength and conditioning staff. I'd imagine there's a time, and each team's different in terms of construction, but is there a return to play coach, or is this skill coaches, either assistant coaches, defense, whether defense, offense, or are there specific individuals responsible for that gap between return to play and return to train from an ice standpoint?
From an ice standpoint, yeah, it depends. So for the most part, we do have a skate coach on staff. His name's David Pelche, and he does take a lot of that on, especially when the team is on the road. So if the team's on the road and the player's hanging back in Edmonton, we don't really have the ability to say you should work with this coach versus this coach, because all our coaches are on the road with the team. So David has to take a lot of that on. But as the player is getting, closer to returning, it's important that they get with their positional coach. And the positional coaches, ultimately, they know exactly what that player needs to do to be successful once they get back into the lineup. So they can dial in that drill selection a little bit better, right? And again, we're still providing the parameters around, work to rest, around intensity. We design our days where we're manipulating our surfaces in efforts to try and get more stopping and starting, or trying to get more acceleration. But ultimately it would be up to the coaches to decide what those drills are. And again, as they get a little bit closer, we want those drills to be as game-like as possible. And that's where a positional coach really comes into play. But for us, David Pelche is a massive part of our return to play.
Fantastic. Testing. This idea, we hear it all the time now. Training is testing. Testing is training. My question to you from the years that you've been doing this at a very high level, and I don't know if you can give away those quote unquote secrets, but what if you come into a training camp with the Edmonton Oilers, or let's just take Edmonton away, for a hockey player, professional hockey player, what do you feel like good baseline tests are? Again, I don't want to frame this and give you bias. I think now 17 years in this profession, I always say, for me, can I get the best narrative for the test? Can it be a part of their process? Can I not crush the player and compete during training camp? And then can I use that as a baseline should the player get injured? Do you view testing, and I put that in air quotes, that in a similar fashion in terms and measures of when you come in for training camp, what's being tested and how you view them from a menu list on what you choose?
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. And that was when I first came on, we had, as an assistant, we had a bunch of tests in there, and we didn't see the place in it. It's like, how could we use this? So I'll give you a couple examples. We were doing, a 3RM bench press. We were doing, a max repetition chin up. We were doing VO2, and, those are all great tests. And, VO2 is the gold standard in terms of looking at, aerobic profiling, but they didn't really help us. So we wanted to redesign our tests. So like you said, they were safe, they were easy to execute, and we could work them into our workout programs, so we could actually use them as consistent monitoring tools. The other thing was with the return to play. So if you have a guy that has a upper body injury, you're not about to do a 3RM bench press test with him, or
Absolutely.
a max stress chin up. So it doesn't help us. you need assessments that will tell you where that player is at. And again, you just can't use those. They're not usable for us. And, same with the VO2, like, if you want to buy metabolic carts, they're extremely expensive. In a team environment, to be able to test, you need multiple. And then in the return to play process, that now takes energy away from the game. So the guy, once they get healthy enough and to a point where you could actually do a test like that, what do you want to do? Do you want to do an off-ice test that's going to fatigue them and take a lot of their reserves, a lot of their energy? Or would you rather do that on the ice, where they ultimately need to be, right? So for us, it's, we looked at, what we are currently doing and we're like, this doesn't help us. So we actually redesigned all our fitness testing where it's everything you just said. It's easy to execute. We could do it in-house. It didn't come at a cost, and it assisted us with the return to play process.
Yeah, fantastic. Another thing I look at again, and this is from a private facility standpoint, because our budgets are different, but if you're not able to get on the ice, what are the best correlates to skating ability? And notice I didn't say hockey playing ability. It's such a complex sport. You can't, you can measure heart, but you can't measure heart. But what are the best correlates, whether it's sprinting or jumping? That's something to think about too. If you don't have, the budget to procure some of this technology, the way that, again, the way that I've looked at it in the past, and I want to get your feedback on this, is I want to measure some sort of movement capacity, how the player moves, whether it's under a load or load. For me, it's not loaded. Performance, whether that be jumping, sprinting, and on ice rather, and then some sort of stress response, which I'd imagine you get from either your heart rate, internal load, and or your external load with the measures that you take GPS wise. Do those buckets make sense to you? Do you view that in a different paradigm?
No, I think that all makes sense. Sprinting is another one for me that's tough. Where I'll do more like sprint profile work is going into the summer. I don't do it at the start of the season. And it's just, again, it comes at a bit of a cost, and it is at the end of the day non-specific. If we are going to do it, I would rather do something like that on the ice. That is optimal. But it's just something I don't do. Like I don't have time in an 82 game schedule to do sprints with the guys, and they haven't adapted to that. Like now we've gone through months and months of skating, and now I'm going to put them on the track and have them sprint. You're probably going to get some shin issues. You're probably going to get some hip flexors issues. So that's that point I made earlier of it comes at a cost. And then with the return to play, like again, like if you have a guy, let's say with a lower body injury, an MCL, for example, like you might never get to a point where you feel comfortable doing something like that. And again, it's going to take time and effort away from the on ice piece.
So true.
But yeah, going back to your point, I agree with everything you brought up. And I don't think that stuff needs to be expensive. Like we use force plates, but Vertex work well. You can do a single leg jump. You could do a single leg bound. You could do a single leg hop if you wanted to look at symmetry. So there's a lot of low cost ways to monitor athletes for sure.
I think it's important. I like this idea too. Obviously, we sprint a lot in the summer, but I can certainly see the conflict in an 82 game National Hockey League schedule when you're looking at the biomotor abilities on ice compared to off ice. Your hips versus hamstrings in terms of your decelerators. Let me ask you this: in terms of on ice testing, if I could kind of pull the hood off and look in the engine here, get a little deeper. And you don't have to give us the actual test, but what elements are you looking for in your testing on ice? Is it an acceleration, a change of direction, and or quote unquote a conditioning? What right now have you found works in terms of efficiency and getting the best bang for your buck at training camp with a team?
Yeah, I actually don't currently do on ice testing.
I'm sure is that something Double J wants to change?
I was going to say, even with having Joel on my staff and the wealth of knowledge and everything he has in that area.
Yes.
We don't currently do it. And again, there's just challenges around it. So at training camp, there's a testing medical day. You're not allowed to go on the ice on that day. And then after that, you have 3 days worth of practices, and then you start playing games. So that means if you're going to do any on ice testing, you have to burn some of that testing time.
Yep.
And I think testing can be valuable. I've had coaches where we have done in the past. Currently, I don't have a coach that wants to use up some of his practice time to be able to do that. There's also PA rules on how much time you can spend on the ice within that 3-day span. So to test, it takes time. And again, it comes at a cost. So would I rather spend my time and energy working more on the technical tactical, probably more the tactical side of things that time of year versus, running these guys through tests? And I'm not saying that it's not valuable, because I do see the value in it. I just think there's some challenges. And right now, we just don't feel like that's a great use of time at that particular time of the year. But if I was doing testing, yeah, I'd want to see an acceleration. I'd want to see a deceleration. I'd want to see a change of direction, and then capacity testing. So if I was doing it, those would be the different things that I would definitely go after. I've done on ice testing years ago, and we did the riot test. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
What is that? The repeat and RIIT? Does that sound right?
Yeah. And it's a hard test. So everyone's listening, just to give them a little bit of an idea of what it is. But you basically start at the goal line, you sprint all the way to the other end, and then you come back through the defensive neutral, and then you reset at the goal line, and then you do it again. So you basically have 30 seconds to complete your sprint. So let's say you do it in 15 seconds, you have 15 seconds rest. And you're coached to go as hard as possible, because it's like a wind gate. You want to see max speed, and then you want to see what the drop off is. So you're coaching them to push hard. We've done that in the past. That practice that day becomes junk. And then the next day isn't that far off. Like, it is only a 3-minute test. It doesn't take long to administer, but it comes at a very high cost. So the question is just, are you willing to do that? So if I did get into any on ice testing, I would probably adjust how I did that. And then for my return to play, a lot of the information I'll collect is through practices, right? So that's what we're using as comparisons, is what we're collecting through that practice information versus using like a real stripped down test, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and it's brilliant. To me, this is target context, target environment, Chad. Here's my analogy, right? You're the king of the driving range, and then you go golf and you hit one in the sand. Like, yeah. You're able to measure what matters most, which is the wear and tear when doing technical and tactical aspects, as opposed to a pre-cooked microwave test. And again, not there's anything wrong with that.
No,
I just think there's not at all. But I really like this idea of starting it. To me, I maybe I'm biased in my old age. I like this idea of collecting that data when it matters most, which is playing. And I don't know if you feel this way either. I think as coaches, I think that we're enamored early on in our careers with the physical capacities. Like, hey, yeah, show me what it is. I want to see a bench. I want to see a squat. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this. It's important. I call this more low-hanging fruit. We can't confuse that with the bountiful harvest, which is what happens closest to the scoreboard. I think at my older age now, I'm starting to really appreciate much more the technical and tactical elements. And those are the hardest to measure, but they're the most relevant to how we get success as coaches.
100%. 100%.
So I love the answer, and it makes sense. So let me ask you, from a tools standpoint, what have you found successful in procuring your baseline measures? Is it force plates? I know you mentioned catapult. Anything else that you're looking at measuring? Are you blood profiling? Anything else from a nutritional standpoint, interventions that you've used or that you currently use that you're able to share with us?
Yeah, in the gym, we do force plate jumps, and we try and do those consistently throughout the course of the summer. We have a Kaiser 420, which is a leg press machine that allows us to do some force velocity profiling. and then we can see asymmetries at those different loads. And, bringing on a tool like that was, again, going back to that conversation of what is easy to execute and then what is safe to execute. So it's very safe. And then there's not a lot of training that has to happen to be able to get good information. It's just literally sit and push. So there's no skill acquisition that comes with that. It's just get on the machine and push. We use a tool called Force Frame. So we can look at isometric strength and then isometric rate of force development. We can look at, the groins, the hips, the ankles, all that kind of good stuff.
And all of these come, I think, just to hit on the point that you made earlier, I think, again, which is fantastic. All of these get great information without wear and tear on the athletes, specifically these isometric tests. You can get rate of force development, you can get peak force, you can get a lot of things that are relevant to athletes without literally, I don't want to say breaking a sweat, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And it's safe, again.
Exactly.
For example, that lower body injury, that MCL, I can get him on that force plate or that 420, and I can get him pushing, and I can get some good symmetry data. I could get some good power data. And, we use all that information to cross-reference with the on-ice stuff, in terms of making our decision whether somebody is, ready to return to sport.
That's fantastic. You've done this for many years, specifically, obviously, getting return to plays. And my question is, are there any heuristics or rules of thumb that you've built over the years regarding timelines, or are there anything that as a staff that you guys abide by that has happened years over years of experience?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Are there any rules of thumb? The idea of a fast and frugal tree. I'll give an example, right? A fast and frugal tree is, you have a question, you're able to answer it, you move on to the next step. If the answer to that is no, then you repeat what you were doing. So, for example, can the athlete attain full functional passive and active range of motion? Nope. We need to fill the gaps and create that situation. Next step. Can that athlete perform at 90% of their pre-isometric levels? The answer to that is no. We're going to go back and mine the gaps. The answer to that is yes. They move on to the next step. So that's kind of like a heuristic or a rule of thumb where you could have a checklist in terms of measures of injury. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand now. Yeah, so we do, and we would have some on our side, and then the medical group would have some on their side as well. They're looking at, joint range. They're looking at stuff like the joint strength.
Yes.
A lot of that is injury dependent. I think it depends on the injuries of what your markers are. And then, for us in the gym, again, we would have our force plates, we'd have our Kaisers, we'd have our isometric tests. And a lot of that is injury dependent. For stuff like upper body, for example, we'll do a half kneeling row on the Kaiser machine at a set weight specific to that body weight. And that allows us to look at right and left, simple things like grip strength. So yes, we definitely have our measures in the gym. We use our monitoring system throughout the entire process. So we're doing all these tests, and then we'll hold in higher regard those specific tests to that injury. And then with the on-ice stuff, like I said, we build that plan and then we progress. The goal is to get them back to where they were pre. So accelerations, for example, we know the number of accelerations that they'll get exposed to within a session and within a week. So we want to try and get to close to that as possible. Same with overall volume. We know what a practice day is versus a game day. So on a game day, we'll actually do stuff like almost like a game simulation. So again, we'll try and get similar volume to what they would get in a game as they're getting closer. So we have some boxes that they'll need to check off on us. And then we'll also cross-reference that with our off-ice measures. And, with a lot of them, your rule of thumb is usually within about a 10% marker. And then what we'll do is we'll put all that information together, and then we'll meet as a team. So whoever's working with this athlete, and then as a group, we'll try and make a decision on how to progress them. So are they hitting their markers? Are they getting enough acceleration work? Where is their force plate jumps? Where is their symmetry at? So we'll use all that information to make our decisions. And again, make that decision with the return to play. So have they done enough? Are they healthy enough? So that is a real group decision. It's not one person making that decision. It happens as a group.
Great.
Good question.
It does. It answers it very well. Thank you. I want to shift gears a little bit. Communicating data. You talked about data analyzation. General question to start. Inform versus persuade. Everybody's different. I've talked to coaches. I've talked to head coaches that say, hey, sell me. You better persuade me. I've talked to others that say, no, don't persuade me. Just inform me. And I'd like to be informed. And then I can make, I can go from there and take the reins. From your experience, communicating data, inform versus persuade in terms and measures of your gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are going to be your head coaches and assistant coaches.
Yeah, I think different strokes for different folks. I think you have to learn how to be adaptable in this business. I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think it just depends on the coach. And, we had a number of years ago, we had a Hall of Fame coach, Ken Hitchcock, come in here. And I remember I sent him a report and he told me, Chad, graphs don't win championships. So right away, I knew sending him a report was the wrong approach, right? So that was a guy I checked in with every day, and he was like, tell me what I need to know, right? And I think early on too, in this process, I didn't know how to differentiate what was interesting and what was important. And
I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's something I had to learn over time. I really like to pass on a lot of information early. And it was like, look at all the cool things we're tracking, look at all the cool things we're doing, but it wasn't always necessarily impactful. So that's something that I've learned to do over time, is pass on what is important. But it definitely depends on the group and it depends on the coach. With our current group, how I share information is I'll meet with our coach at the start of the month and we'll put together a calendar. So we know exactly what our practice plans look like in terms of volume and intensity. We know what our goals are for that day. So that would be step number one. And then step number two, I'll send out like a midweek report around fatigue. So I'll put all our fatigue markers together and I'll give him a little indication on how we're doing, how we're adapting. And I try and make that as simple and palatable as possible. And then at the end of every week, I'll put together a report summarizing how the week went. So how did we do? Do we hit our goal for the week? Yes or no? And then on top of that, I'll try and meet with our coach every day. So I'll have a conversation with him, and he usually spitballs some things with me, like, hey, I know today was supposed to be easier. I'm going to end up pushing the guys a little bit harder. And ultimately, that's his decision. He's the coach. My job is to help manage allostatic load and help pass on information. But ultimately, he's the coach. It's his team. It's his decision. And it's my job to support him in that process, however he sees fit, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I like this idea. It's a heat meter, in my opinion. It's called emotional intelligence. It's everyone's going to be different, and everyone might.
Yeah.
The Hitchcock example is brilliantly stated. You learn real quick how you want the information delivered, and everybody's different, right?
Exactly.
In terms of what you just talked about, delivering this information, whether it's daily with the coaching staff or weekly when you look at the calendar, do you use AMS, like athlete management system, to procure your graphs? Do you do this a la carte, meaning you're creating your own graphs either via Excel or other programming? How do you put that data in color picture?
Yeah, so we do use an athlete management system. We have all these tools, as I was kind of describing you about, and they all have their own little platforms. It becomes very difficult to jump from tool to tool. So it has to be aggregated.
Yes.
So we aggregate everything onto our athlete management system. And then that also acts as our data hub. So that holds all our data. On that system, we are able to build out dashboards. So anything that is consistent will pull up on that dashboard. But then I also do a ton of work on Tableau. And once I get all the information on to that athlete management system, then it's easy to export it off. And then I put it onto Tableau and I can play with it and I can manipulate it and I can look at it in different ways, or, cross-reference it with other with other tools. So yes, I use athlete management, and again, it holds everything, but I do a ton on Tableau and Excel as well.
Excellent. A couple of final questions here. I want to respect your time. I ask this of everyone in terms of the high performance landscape right now. Where do you see the pendulum swinging? Where are we in terms and measures of our profession? And I can give it a little bit more detail if that question doesn't resonate. But the performance pendulum or the landscape right now in high performance, which way are we swinging? Are we 10, 15 years ago it was about content knowledge? Now, where are we? Or it may still be there.
Yeah, I think it depends. If we're just talking about pro sports, I think it kind of depends on the league. I think the NHL is a little bit younger in terms of, performance. I think the NHL is still in need of adding, different layers to their performance teams and their performance departments.
Yes.
I think other sports have almost taken it too far. And I think they have these massive staffs where they don't have a lot of direction. And I'm generally speaking, there are some organizations out there that are doing an excellent job of high performance sport. But I think you have to be cautious. And a lot of it comes down to making sure you're hiring the right person with the right vision that's empowered to hire their staff. I think where it's challenging is having different people adding different parts to those groups. So coaches adding people or GMs adding people, and then that group doesn't work together, or they have in some cases too much of the same. So I think it's important that the right person is in charge of hiring those staffs. And then, like I said, I do think hockey is catching up, and I think other sports have gone a little bit too far. I do think also on the tech side, I think there was a bit of an arms race at first, over the past 8 years or so. There's all these cool tools and everything coming out, and everyone's like, I need it, I want it, and didn't really understand where it had its place or how to implement it, or just taking a step back and doing one thing, one step at a time, and doing it really well before you move on to the next step. So I think a lot of people are going to slow down a little bit in terms of adding technology. I think we're also now learning through this process that technology has issues, it has limitations. And I do think at the end of the day, we're still a people business. And I think it's important to get the right people in the right positions first. And then again, start looking then now at adding the tech. And I think the tech is great. I think it makes us better. I think it's important. I think we just need to proceed with caution. And then the other interesting thing, sorry, this is a long-winded answer.
No, I love it. I love it. Keep going.
The other interesting thing is just where sport is. Like, we just came out of, COVID, and we're not fully out of it, but we're coming out of COVID. So there's still a little hesitancy around people coming back to public settings. I think with that, people have now started to socialize a little bit different. I think we have a new generation of sports fans out there. And then with COVID and just where the economy's at, I think things are getting expensive. And I think sport is a little bit of a luxury. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's interesting to see where the economics are going to be with sport. And to put together performance teams, it's not cheap, it's expensive. So I don't know if that will impact, again, some of these other sports with bigger staffs. I don't know what the financial ramifications will be of that either. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer for you.
No, that's really interesting. A couple things that I thought were interesting about the first portion of that comment. You talked about this idea of data arms race or technology arms race. I kind of inclined to have the same opinion. Mine might be a little bit different. I think right now in that pendulum, I think right now it's this metric fixation. And I think at times that might come at the cost of content knowledge. Like when I say content knowledge, I mean first principles like biomechanics, adaptation, programming. I think it's all important. I think those two have to be married to one another. To me,
you need good practitioners.
Yeah.
We need to learn how to be coaches first.
Yes.
I think that's an important thing.
The other thing too is because like I look at your position right now, the technical and tactical elements of the game, but you also know the numbers. And here is the crazy part. Numbers in the best of times, we say everybody has opinion, but you got to be objective. I get it. But in the most objective times, numbers, you're still subjective. It's called assumptions and interpretations. and you have to have those. To me, the content knowledge brings a number to life. It tells a story. It creates a black and white picture, and it turns it to color. And I those two, one without the other, to me is I see it happening where, someone's just being hired for a number, and it's like, whoa, but do you know what a 2-1-2 breakout is, or a 2-1-2 forecheck? Do you know what a neutral zone trap is? And again, that can all be learned, but I fear that one without the other can be a rocky terrain, if that makes sense.
No, totally makes sense.
I also like this idea, what you said about this idea of, settlers versus, this idea of technology, and at times waiting for that technology to not be so new. You find out what the kinks potentially were, and what the limitations were, because it's been used longer and longer and longer, and you find out it might be worth it at the end or not worth it. You know what I mean? As opposed to jumping on something when it first is released and it's the newest and biggest.
Well, that's something, Anthony. So I think we do pretty good as a staff is when we're bringing on technology. So we have a performance group, and in this performance group, we have coaches, we have strength coaches, we have therapists, we have physicians, we have people in player development, we have general managers. And what we do is we first ask the question of, what do we need answered? What are we missing? How could we get better? And then what tools are out there that help us get better? And then it would be my job to collect different products, so different options, and then collect research on these products and then present it to the group.
This is fantastic. I love this, by the way. What a great idea.
Yeah, it's important to have people from different areas. And, the coaches, for example, it's important for the coaches to be part of that process because, one, they have to understand it, and two, they have to want it. If they don't want that information, then there's no point collecting that information, because ultimately,
so true.
One's making the decision. So they need to be part of that. And they usually ask really good questions, and they look at things differently than we look at things. So it's important to have different opinions within that group. But ultimately, that's how we make decisions. So we will present to the group, and then the group will ask their questions. And then if we think that there's, that this particular product could help us moving forward, then that's where it's up to Ken Holland, our general manager, to make the decision if we're going to invest in it. And then if we are, then we bring it in. And the nice thing is now the education processes have already started. Like, everybody understands it. They know its place. They know what they're looking at. And that's something that we do as an organization whenever we're looking at bringing in new stuff.
This is brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I'm fond of saying science starts and ends with problems, right? You got a problem, you got a temporary theory, you've got error elimination, which in this case is your measure, and then invariably another problem presents itself. But in this case, the problem starts by asking a coach or someone that's really close to it, hey, what can we solve what's a problem that you want measured, or what's a problem that we can help with? Is there a problem? Yeah. And I think that starts where it needs to, which is if the coach or the gatekeeper doesn't have buy-in, you're collecting numbers at that point.
Yeah, that's it. And it's great and it's fancy, but again, if it's not being used, why are you doing it?
That's fantastic. Last question for you, my friend. You've been in this league for many years. At the end of your career, whenever that is in strength and conditioning, the National Hockey League, how do you want to be remembered as a coach?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think at the end of the day, I want to be known as a good coach. I think that's important to me. That's something that I pride myself on, is my ability to communicate, my ability to build relationships, and my ability to adapt to different personalities. So I want to be known as a good coach. That's important to me. So I think that would be it. And then I take a few championships on top of that too.
Our guest today has been Chad Drummond. Chad, thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
Thanks, Anthony.